Alrighty, so we are about to start Mary Mart's second ever education hour. So today it's going to be focused on cannabis compliance and policy. And today we have a good friend of mine, Brooke Davies. She is a government affairs consultant, and she's going to be spreading some real knowledge today. So keep you guys' ears peeled, all right? All right, without further ado, please help me welcome Brooke Davies.
Thank you guys. Thanks so much for having me. Okay, so first I just want to tell you guys a little bit about myself so you can understand how I became to get to this spot, to be in this position. So my name is Brooke. I'm originally from Virginia. I moved to Seattle 5 years ago, and when I came to Seattle, is it loud enough? Okay. When I came to Seattle, I was really interested in working in legal cannabis because, of course, in Virginia, it's very, very illegal. So I started my career working at a retail store in Seattle. I can hold this better. Is this better? Yeah, this is better. I'll just hold it. Okay, so I started working at a retail store in Seattle. Actually started as a bud tender, just like you guys. And while I was working as a bud tender, I eventually moved up and started doing management, administrative work, stuff like that. And I realized that if we didn't have somebody on the ground in Olympia trying to figure out the way all the laws and rules are changing, it's really difficult to run a retail store. You're doing something wrong one way, you teach your entire staff how to do it, and then you find out things have changed. So that really sparked my interest, and with cannabis being illegal in Virginia, I decided I really want to find out how this works. How do we pass a law? How do we, figure out rulemaking, all of that stuff? And that's how everything started. So today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how laws work and rules work and how all of you guys can get involved in that process. So first of all, in order to understand all the rules and regulations, laws that you guys follow in your store, you have to fundamentally understand what's the difference between a law and a rule. So a lot of times I hear people talking about that's against the law, but really it might just be a simple rule. Okay, so first of all, a law is the RCW, and an RCW stands for Revised Code of Washington. This is set by the Washington State Legislature, okay? And in Washington State, we operate on a biennium, meaning that every 2 years they set the budget for the entire state of Washington. So every other year we have a long session, that's a 100-day session, and in that 100-day session, that's where the majority of the policy work takes place, and they set the budget for the next 2 years. After the 100-day session, it's followed by a 60-day session. The 60-day session is the short session. And when you have a short session, usually they're just going back and fixing things, maybe mistakes that they made in the long session. It's not typically when we see large new policies passed. So every other year, the biennium is when you can really get an opportunity to change the law. And actually this year we'll be starting a long session on January 14th. Okay, so that is the law. And for cannabis issues that you guys would be concerned with, it's important for you to know that all of our issues go through the House Commerce and Gaming Committee, and through the Senate they go through the Labor and Commerce Committee. And when you're trying to get a bill passed to change the law, it's actually a lot of work. You've got to get it passed through both chambers, meaning you have to get it passed through the entire House, then you have to get it passed through the entire Senate, and then they have to take a floor vote on it. If it passes through all of that, which can be very difficult, the final stop is the governor has to sign it for it to go into law. So once something has gone into law, that law then gives statutory authority to the LCB to make rules. So it's also really important for you guys to understand that the Liquor Control Board cannot make rules on anything that they're not given the authority to do so. So Washington State will pass a bill, something broad, for example, that you guys know, like advertising. So they may say, okay, so for cannabis advertising, you're only allowed to have 2 1,600 square inch signs affixed to the building. And we give rulemaking authority to the LCB to write more specific rules on this topic. So they can't just make rules about anything. They're giving specific authority through the legislature. So RCW would always trump the rule. So if you can find a law that's actually, it's going to supersede what the rule would be, and they can only make rules on things that they're given the authority to make rules on. So rules are called WACs, the Washington Administrative Code. And the people that write all of our rules in the cannabis industry are formerly the Liquor Control Board. They're now called the Liquor Cannabis Board. Okay, so that's held year-round, unlike the legislature, which is only in session for 100 days and then 60 days. The LCB is constantly doing rulemaking. They do it all the time. If you guys aren't familiar with the people that are on the Liquor Control Board, basically there's somebody that's a policy and rules coordinator specifically for marijuana policy. So that's the person that writes all of our rules, although the public has lots of opportunity to input on those. So one thing that I really wanted to talk to you guys about today is how you can get involved in the rulemaking process and how it works, because it's all public information. So I know that when I was working, what you guys are doing in cannabis, I would typically find out about a new rule and then I'd be like super upset about it after the fact. Like, how did this happen? I had no idea who made this, who was doing it. And when I would reach out to the LCB, they would say, well, where were you when we held the public hearing? Where were you? You didn't submit any public comments. We asked everybody for their input and nobody said anything. So we went ahead and made this rule. And now you're telling me that it doesn't work for you. So in the rulemaking process, the first step is the LCB files a CR 101. When they file a CR 101, you can sign up to be notified about those. They're also available on the webpage. But if you put your email in, you'll get an email that says, we just opened up a new rulemaking on educational samples. So it's a broad topic. At this point in the rulemaking, the CR 101, there's absolutely no language at all. So they don't have any proposed draft language. They just say, hey, we're going to broadly open up a rulemaking on this random topic. And they allow the public time to submit their comments. Okay, this part is actually the most influential time for you guys to submit comments and actually get real results, because there's no language yet. Once they start making language, then it's a little bit more difficult to go back in and change that language. But when they open it up broadly, then you can submit your comments.
So how long does that period last?
There's an exact number, but it's a long, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it's long. It can be 3 months, 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, so typically, there's an exact number, but I think it's around 3 months. And sometimes, typically, they'll push it out because they're really busy. They have other stuff going on, but it's not like it's a week. It's enough time that you could talk to all your people and submit some thoughtful comments. But that's definitely, I would always tell people that I worked with and consulted with, if you want to make a change, doing it at that time is the easiest time to do it, right? So you could say, you know, whatever you think your opinions are on that. And you'd be surprised, sometimes they're only getting like 1 or 2 comments. If it's a really important thing, they'll get maybe 20, 25 or more. But yeah, that's a really influential time.
Can you urge them to create one?
You can. So that's a good question. How do they go into a CR 101? They can do so because they were directed by the legislature. Okay. There's also something called a petition for rulemaking. So anybody can submit a petition for rulemaking. If you submit a petition for rulemaking, that's not a guarantee that it'll be accepted. But you could say, hey, we want you to open up a rulemaking on this. Now, it still has to be under their authority. They may write back to you and say, we can't, this would require a change in the law. But yeah, anybody can do that. Okay, that's a good question. After this, so after the 3 months or whatever where the public submits comments on the CR 101, then they'll file a CR 102. So when they file the CR 102, this is the first time where they've actually produced draft language. So you'll get a chance to look at their draft rules, right? Then you can read those, and again, they give you the same amount of time. It's usually 3 months to submit written comments, and then they actually hold a public hearing on the draft language. Anybody can come down and participate in the public hearing. Of course, people work jobs, they're not able to make it. You can submit your comments via email. Okay, it's rules@lcb.wa.gov. And you can submit those. They have a time of what they take them up to. If you are able to make it, you can testify in the public hearing. So it's all public record. They have cameras there. They have the policy and rules coordinator that will describe why they wrote the draft language that they did. And then they'll open it up for public comment. When you get up, you would say, I'm Misha Jones. I'm from Tacoma. I'm representing Mary Mart today. And you can say, I've got comments on this and this is why, and they will listen to you. You get 3 minutes and you talk to the board members directly. Yeah, so again, it is an influential time. However, at that point, they already have language. So if you're going to make a change, it's got to be, you have to have, you don't want to give them broad ideas. You've got to be pretty specific, and you want to show specific examples. Like, this is, this is an unreasonable, here's a good example. Recently in the 2017 cannabis legislation, that's a big set of rules. There was a part in the rules about vendor samples. And it said that vendor samples could only be given to people on staff with product ordering authority. Okay, now for us, we're like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. But you have to understand from their perspective, they're making rules for the worst actors, right? And their fear was that vendor samples may be used as forms of compensation for some employees, which that obviously would never happen here, but that could happen. So my suggestion to them was, and I explained to them, I've been the buyer for a store before, and it's impossible for me to sample all of these vendor samples. I rely on the bud tenders to try them, and they submit reviews to me, and that's how I make my decisions. When I told them that, they're like, that makes perfect sense. We didn't think of that. And so I had drafted language for them of how they could include that. So that worked. It changed the rule, and it said that you just had to keep it documented somewhere who you gave the samples to, and that they submitted something back to you.
Damn, well thank you, Brooke. That's huge. That's huge.
So that's just one example, but they make rules on everything.
It seems like there's not a large base activity in public comment. So you said 20 to 25 on public comment.
Yeah, I think so. I think what happens, I totally agree with you, and I think they would agree with you too. The comment was that the public's not that involved. Yeah, I think honestly what it is I think they're trying their best to get everybody involved, but everybody's so busy running their business, and that they don't really know about these things until they affect them later.
It's fascinating that the CR level doesn't have any that is literally leaving it up to the public.
Yeah. What are your ideas on these things? Totally. And they really are open to, especially if you can show them, like in your public testimony, firsthand, because they don't know, they don't work in the industry, right? And so if you explain it, they're really open to those ideas. Now granted, they have a job to do, there are regulators, so there's some limits, but if you can present an argument that's reasonable, they're usually, in my experience, open to that. Like with the vendor samples, it did work. So if they do decide to make a change during the CR 102, then they have to file a supplemental CR 102. Okay, so that means they have to go through the CR 102 all over again. So they've got to send to everybody on that list, all the licensees and anybody that signed up, another copy of the draft language, and then allow you to submit comments again, and they have to hold another public hearing. So you basically just delayed the process by another 3 months. If there were no significant changes or anything, they would just go with the CR 103. But if they do make changes, they've got to go through that process all again. Okay, so then after they've done the supplemental CR 102, your chances are getting smaller and smaller of making changes because they've already done all of this work, right? So that's why you want to get it at the beginning, because now we're 9 months in, we're not going backwards, we've already done this. Where were you at the last public hearing? We already talked about this. So after they do the supplemental CR 102 and hold the hearing, then they'll schedule CR 103. At the CR 103, that's when they basically adopt it. And after they adopt it, they usually go into effect within 90 days. And so they'll put out a thing, okay, this rule is going to go into effect. Any questions on rulemaking? Okay, cool. Okay, so then that's like the rulemaking process. Now I want to talk a little bit about important cannabis legislation. So again, this is stuff that happened in the actual legislature. And I talked briefly about, I don't want to be like your 9th grade civics class, how a bill becomes a law, because that's really, really hard to, it's a huge, long process. But we can talk about things that have passed recently. And just to put it in perspective for you, every year we see about 60 to 80 cannabis bills. And usually 1 to 3 passes. So there's a lot of bill tracking and hearings. So there's a lot of bills, and usually only 1 or 2 passes. So, excuse me, in 2017, so not last session, but the session before, we had 1 bill that was passed, but it was an omnibus bill. So another thing that happens frequently is if there's a ton of different bills, they'll put them all into one so that the legislature has to take 1 vote. Because even though all of us, cannabis is the most important thing to us, they're still solving the housing crisis, transportation, carbon emissions, and so sometimes they will try to put it all into one if they can to vote 1 on cannabis. So in 2017, they passed a gross Senate Bill 5131, and that had a lot of different things in it. Number one, it was all the advertising restrictions that you guys are probably familiar with. So that bill actually started a lot more strict than it ended up. It was its own bill, and it was going to actually compare our advertising restrictions to that of tobacco. So we were going to be very limited in any print advertising we could do. But working through the legislature with industry groups and other folks, we were able to amend that down to the restrictions that you see today. So our billboards are limited now. They can only have the name of your business, the address of your business, and the nature of your business. No pictures of plants or cartoons, nothing that appeals to children, and you can only have 2 16-square-inch signs affixed to your building. Other than that, no outdoor advertising is permitted. You know, that was probably the biggest thing in that bill, and a lot of people were unhappy with the way that it ended up, myself included. But if you think about where they were coming from, and it started a lot worse than it ended up. So if you saw the original text of the bill, we actually were able to negotiate to get to a point where we could live with. And compared to other states too, that's something that we do, is look at what are the policies in other states. I think you guys would find Washington is one of the stricter states as far as rules and laws. So that was one piece, the advertising. Another one was, in 2017 was the first time that we actually legalized the non-commercial transfer of marijuana. So up until 2017, it was technically illegal for you to share a joint with your friend. The purpose of that, obviously, was being that ensures that every person that purchased legal marijuana was 21. But removing that restriction was a good move in the right direction. For example, you know, if you were a medical patient that wasn't able to make it to the store, now legally somebody could get that for you and give it to you. Not like people were actually prosecuting that, but non-commercial transfer is a step in the right direction. Another thing was the use it or lose it. That's a nickname that we called it. But basically, this applies to marijuana retailers as far as ownership goes, but folks were holding on to licenses. It's a closed system, so there's only so many licenses that exist. It can be difficult for some folks to open if they're in a ban or moratorium area. They're suffering with like local stuff that is preventing them from opening. But otherwise, they have to open a store if they have a license within a certain amount of time. And the LCB had rulemaking authority on that. So basically now you can't hoard licenses because they are worth a significant amount of money.
So is there a specific market for store licenses, or is it kind of you have to know something?
No, there is. There's licensed brokers. So just like a real estate broker type of thing, people that sell and trade licenses. But as a result of the use it or lose it, we actually have almost all stores operating now unless they can't for some reason. And as a result of this, the LCB actually made a rule that allows for an owner to get a open. But it would prevent me from, say I own Mary Mart and I don't want anybody to open around me, just buying up the licenses but not opening. You can't do that anymore. Another thing that they did was they put an ownership cap for retailers, so by law, you can only own up to 5 retail stores. So that was, you know, a couple different things that they did in this one giant omnibus bill. In 2018, we only passed 2 bills to do with marijuana. One was House Bill 2334, which surrounded the testing of imported CBD. So licensees import CBD sometimes from outside of the 502 market, and that was sort of a gray area before as to whether or not it was allowed. This bill didn't explicitly make it legal. It just said that if you are importing anything, that material has to be subject to the same testing requirements as everything else in 502. So it makes sense, a little bit contentious in the sense that we still have stores selling untested CBD that are not in the 502 system, and that's something that will probably be addressed this year in the legislature. But the idea is that since this is a state licensed store, we want to make sure everything sold in this store is safe and tested for public consumption, human consumption. So it might result in prices being a little bit higher for us as compared to the other stores until something happens with the unregulated CBD being sold. Another one that this is a really minor bill, 2474 House Bill, just removed the requirement of sublotting on the label. So for producer processors, it was a big one. They couldn't just like print a giant label for all their people. They had to make separate sublots that say Mary Mart. So it sort of streamlined their process a little bit and makes it more like you know, a normal industry like Coca-Cola or anything else. So really minor, but had a big effect for some of the producer processors. And then another bill that was in the state legislature last year started as a delivery bill to allow for recreational delivery. They've done that a lot of years. It then got amended down into just a medical delivery bill. So if you've got a medical card, you could have delivery to your house. There was some interest in that because I think the legislature and at the Liquor Control Board, there's an appetite to try to help the medical community. Our state's one of the only ones that has put them into one group. But the medical community was like, this is not exactly what we need. It's not really delivery. There was some hesitation from the retailers as well as how that would work from a compliance standpoint. How would we make sure we can verify the identity? How are we going to ensure the safety of our drivers? And so because there were so many questions, they amended that bill down to a directed study. So that's another thing that the legislature can do. They can give money to the LCB to study a certain topic and then come back to them. So the LCB had to deliver a report to the legislature by December of 2018 on medical delivery and how it would work.
So is that coming out soon?
It has come out.
It has?
Yep. And so, I mean, I can summarize it for you. They didn't make any real recommendation, but they basically explored what other states did, their successes, their failures, and then they also talked to a lot of different industry groups and representatives, stakeholders, to get their thoughts on it, and with the medical community. So I think the overall consensus was that for a medical delivery program at this point, maybe the risk is not worth the reward in the sense that the medical patients are looking for other things like more medically compliant products, and the retailers have so much liability in that. Like, no retailers were really, some were, but most were like, well, who's going to protect the drivers and how's that going to work? And so I think their overall thing was, we could do it, maybe it's a good idea, but there's also a lot of problems. Yeah. So, but that's just medical delivery. It wasn't recreational delivery. Just medical delivery was what the study was.
Gotcha.
So that brings me to the next point, which was policy in Washington compared to policy in other states, and some things that are different. So delivery was the first bullet. For example, we do not allow delivery here, but other states do. California does. And it's kind of interesting because now I read yesterday, there's 43 states that have some sort of positive marijuana laws. 33 allow medical and 10 allow full adult use recreational. So it's interesting, you can pull up like a matrix and kind of see what people do in other states. Another thing that we don't allow here that other states do is home grow. So that bill was in the legislature last year, but it didn't pass. Public consumption is something that Washington has really struggled to be successful in legalizing because we have really strict clean air laws in the state of Washington. Other states have been able to get some consumption stuff, but we still do not. And then our medical system is something else that's different. We've combined them into one system, and other states still have kind of a separate medical system. So that's something that we're still working on making better. There's been a couple like big nonprofits that have opened up where licensees and the public are able to contribute money to help medical patients pay the prices that they're paying right now. You know, I think that's their biggest complaint is that they haven't been able to get enough medically compliant product, and that the price difference with the excise tax is still not quite there. Otherwise, we seem to be serving the medical community okay, and there are a lot of stores that have the medical endorsement, and they're actually giving cards, but it's still something that we're working to perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, then the last thing on here was talking about the upcoming session and things that we're going to do in 2019 from an industry perspective. So one thing that might be exciting to you guys here is that we are looking to legalize recreational cannabis stores to be able to sell branded merchandise and apparel.
Yes.
And it wouldn't just be your apparel, but you could also sell apparel from your vendors and things like that. We've done this bill for the last 3 years and it hasn't passed, but this year we might be able to get support for it. Basically, the points are that we have higher compliance rates than the tobacco industry, than the alcohol industry. The compliance rates in marijuana are like 98%. You know, if you can trust us to sell these regulated products, we should also be able to sell limited t-shirts, apparel, things like that. But we'll see what happens with that. Another point on it is that since we are so limited in what we can do with outdoor advertising, it's a way that you can sort of rep your brand without being giant signs outside, and a little extra revenue that's not subject to the high tax that the rest of the products are. That's one thing. Another thing, which would also be exciting to everybody here, is bud tender criminal penalty reform. So I don't know if you guys know this, but as a bud tender, you're every day facing a felony if you were to accidentally make a sale to a minor, whereas in the alcohol industry, it's just a gross misdemeanor. And so we're looking to see some parity on that. We'll see what happens. Obviously, the biggest difference is that alcohol is not federally illegal. So there's always that distinction, but I think we've seen with the passage of the Farm Bill at the federal level, Canada legalizing, 43 states now with positive marijuana reforms, that we're sort of moving towards that, and it's not necessary for an entry-level employee to face a felony every single day for just doing their job. Now, if you can prove that there was neglect and you were like, hey, my cousin, come in, you're underage, doing it purposefully, that's one thing. But if it was just a mistake, we're just looking to make that a misdemeanor instead of a felony. Another thing that, again, I think you guys would be interested in, because I know you work with some wellness companies, is recently in this edibles issue that I've been talking with you about that we've worked on, one other thing that they said with the new packaging and labeling rules was that they are not allowing therapeutic claims, right? So even like deep sleep, products like that they're considering that a medical claim instead of a therapeutic claim. So the bill that we're proposing, the industry, is clarifying what is and what is not a medical claim, and kind of making a difference between saying this will cure your Crohn's disease versus this may aid in digestion. Just like the FDA has done, right, to allow supplement companies to suggest a possible instead of like a cure. So we're hopeful about that. Those are the main bills that I think the industry will be seeking, but every legislative session, bills come from different places. There's pretty much like three main groups. The industry will come together and put bills that they see the industry moving forward. So whatever, like the things I mentioned. Also, the agency has their own request legislation. So the Liquor Control Board will also put forth bills that are going to help them regulate the industry better. I'm not sure exactly what all the agency request legislation is this year. I know they're looking to seek a lab accreditation process. There's been some issues in the industry with consistency from all of the different testing labs, and we see like a range of results. So putting together some sort of accreditation program, holding them to some kind of standard. I don't know the details, but I know that's one area that they're looking at.
Excuse me.
Maybe eventually looking at some sort of bud tender training program, something like that. And then, so you've got the industry that would put forth bills, you've got the actual agency that would put forth bills, and then of course the last one would be any lawmaker that has a special interest in it, or because their constituents care a lot about it. So we still see every year. If you want to put things into perspective, you should watch the live hearings in the legislature, because 22% of the population in Washington still exists in an area with a ban or a moratorium. So meaning these local jurisdictions have decided to not have legal cannabis there, and that's because they don't want it. And when we passed Initiative 502, it's not because the legislature voted on it, it was because the people voted on it. And a lot of those people are in the Seattle, Tacoma, west side of the state. So there's still places on the east side of the state that don't want cannabis. And lawmakers from those areas every year will put forth bills. There's a bill every year to end 502. There's a bill every year to make it more, I think there's one pre-filed bill this year that basically makes the zones where we can have stores even more strict. So it adds things like bus stops and daycares. Like already we can't be near schools, etc., but they added more things. So there always are bills that seek to tighten the rules that already exist. So you kind of see three different things come into play. The prevention community is part of that too. So prevention community has their own groups, and they'll put forward bills, that again are seeking to tighten the legal system that we have. The last thing is basically how can you guys get involved? Anybody that's a customer or somebody that works here. First thing is to know who your lawmakers are. So know like your district, if you work at a store, who are the lawmakers in that store. You can just go online and put in your address, and then you'll get your list of lawmakers. You can send them emails, you can send them letters, you can call their office, you can find out what committees they're on, and you can try to influence that way. Another way is to participate in the rulemaking process, which again goes on year round. So you can put in your email, you can sign up for all the updates so that you will know any time that they're going to change a rule. You can also submit your own comments as a person, as an employee, or whoever. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. So if you guys missed any of that, we're going to be writing a blog post about it. We should be airing that sometime in January or February. There's going to be a written part and the video part as well. So happy holidays. Happy solstice. Be safe out there. All right, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for listening. Nice to meet you too.
I'm a political science major from university.
Oh, cool. Well, you're perfect to get involved then.
And I've wanted to work with some cannabis legislation. And I started with this.
Yeah.